Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today. Very excited to welcome everyone to our PERG EWI Coffee Break series. My name is Allison Couples. I am the coordinator of the PERG EWI program for this round. Very excited to be here. And today we're going about top things to know about Sony cinema cameras. And we're hearing from folks at Sony. And before we go any further, I'd love to thank our annual sponsors, Anton Bauer, Ari, Estera, Duclos, Lightgear, Panavision, and Taylor & Taylor. Without them, none of this would be possible. Today we will hear from two people at Sony. Well, two people. Katie Eleneke is a DP and a Sony senior trainer. And there is just no one better when it comes to cameras. She knows everything through and through. And we will also hear from Michael Pessah, ASC, who is known for his award-winning scripted and documentary work. And thank you also to Tanya Lyon at Sony for helping us put this together.
So I was just saying thank you so much to Tanya, who has been working behind the scenes, and Sylvia and Ted also on our crew with us. And we've got Sam Ferris here in the background. We also have Ben in the background. We have the whole family is here. Michael Pessah is an amazing DP, shoots everything from narrative and unscripted, but also what's so special is that you use so many of the Sony Cinema Line cameras, and you have such great insight as to the decisions that you make based off of your project and what cameras you use. And so we really wanted to kind of to be able to talk about the cameras from that point. So I'm going to jump into my chair over here. We'll do our best to kind of monitor if there's questions as we go, and we'll answer and take them as we can.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie, and thank you, everyone. I think one of the great things about Sony is that they have such an incredible support team here, including cinematographers like Katie. And you know, I've found that they're always available to answer questions and hear feedback, and having a company that you rely on for your cameras that is always willing to have a dialogue with you and really be in conversation. Cinematographer is just so to a conversation and not just sort of a monologue, if you will. Well, I'm here to talk a little bit about the Sony line, I guess, from my perspective as a cinematographer that films a lot of scripted work and a lot of unscripted work and a lot of work that sort of lies in between. The lines between these two idioms are sort of blurred these days, which is part of the really fun part of where I think we are as a sort of industry, and some of the cameras in particular. And I think just my perspective on that.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with just showing the big Sony Cinema Line slide. This is something we expect you to write down by hand. I'm just kidding. We actually will have a link at the end that you will be able to kind of dive into, and all of the clips will be available to view, because we're going to watch some things and we know it's not always great when we're doing it online. And then we also will have the slides available to you. So this is something that we've compiled over time. It's all the questions that people like Michael Pessah, other ACs, that everyone uses or asks. And so we've compiled them accordingly based off of the different cameras, because I think things like this often are the questions that Michael is asking. So I will kind of keep going. The next slide is also just the media per camera. We get this question a lot as well, because there's CF Express Type B now, and there's A, there's XQDs. CF Express Type B doesn't work with FX9. XQD and CF Express are a little different. So these are also things that we go over quite often, because obviously if you're shooting Sony Venice, then you will be using a proprietary card. With Burano FX9, FX6, FX3, FR7, blah, blah, blah. All of those cards are available through Sony, but also you can buy third-party cards if needed. So one of the first things that we want to show is your commercial, or do you want to dive into what's this?
So I think we should maybe just talk about why does a cinematographer choose a camera first?
Great.
And so one thing that the folks here asked me to kind of speak to was maybe this audience would be interested, at least from my perspective as, you know, sort of an ASC member, or the cinematographer, why do we choose the cameras we do? And I think sometimes, particularly if you're working in a rental environment, you get a call and you say, okay, we need, we need 3 Venice 2s and an FX3, for example, or 3 of some other type of camera. Why is that? Is it just sort of a dartboard, or do we, does it appear to us, as an epiphany? How is it that we make this choice? And I thought it was a really interesting question. And so I tried to break it down in terms of some sort of talking points. And why does a cinematographer choose a camera? Well, the first one is deliverable. And it seems like most of the cameras have sort of settled into being 4K compatible. But for a minute, being able to deliver a true 4K image was very, very important to certain networks and certain streamers. And just the simple question is, can this camera hit a certain resolution or a certain amount of pixels, was very, very important. And some cameras were just crossed right off the list if they couldn't meet those specs. And so that's a very just sort of fundamental question. If the camera doesn't provide the deliverables you need, then you can't use it. Similarly, I think one thing that we're wrestling with a little bit now is sometimes you're hearing that cameras need to have 4K in 9:16. They also need to deliver or a high resolution in a 9:16 extraction, because sometimes we're asked to film both 16:9 and then provide a 9:16 for socials in the middle. And does the camera now have a high enough pixel count to be able to extract high quality from the center of that? So again, if it sort of just doesn't hit that threshold, the camera's out of the question, and however much you love it, you can't use it.
Yeah.
The next question is really, and these aren't in any particular order besides the order that they popped into my brain. The form factor, right? Can the crew work with it? Can we, if you've got a lot of shots with a car mount, will the camera fit on a car mount? If it's Steadicam, is it a camera that's going to play well with the Steadicam? If it's all handheld, is it a good camera to handhold? So these are all things that you're thinking about. And you want to have a camera that just works with the humans and the space that you're filming it. Next is the media ecosystem or the workflow, right? Is post set up to use this file system, or is there going to need to be almost a training process to step post-production through how to use the files or how to use this workflow? Some editing systems play better with some files than others. Some cameras will record on a file format that DaVinci Resolve won't recognize at all. These are all things you need to consider. And decide, is this a sort of struggle you want to undertake if the camera is that your host team isn't familiar with, or do you want to use something that's just more master clean? Color system, right? Very important. Will my color choices be maintained throughout the process? From looking at a monitor on set to final color grade, and the color science you're working in, and the way that works, whether or not you're using a live grade or whether you're using LUTs or it's just 709. The color system you're working within is very important, and that's something you want to think about. Rental costs. Again, a lot of times you'll suggest something, and they'll say, well, those are a little expensive. There's something similar that's less expensive. Or you can have that camera, but you can't have 2 of them. But you can have 2 of something else. And that's something you think about a lot. And I'm sure folks in the rental community, you're probably dealing with that part of it a whole bunch. And same thing if you're an owner operator, right? Is this a camera that I can afford to make a payment on, even if I'm not working 360 days a year? Is this a camera I can afford to make a payment on? And even if I'm compelled to use a different camera, or sometimes some production companies won't rent your camera from you because of other arrangements, can this camera be a camera that can sit in your closet or in your garage or wherever you're keeping it for a month or 2 when you're not using it? This next one, I think, is something that is almost underestimated in terms of camera choice, which is a lot of times directors and cinematographers work backwards from the lens and find their way to the camera. You'll hear it all the time. They have to shoot on Cook S4s. Cook S4s are the lenses that are going to give them the look they want. And what camera works best with Cook S4s, and which camera will accommodate that. They have to use Canon K35s, for example, right? I've heard that a bunch. Can this camera accommodate a K35?
And to that point, I know with like for the FX9, for example, a lot of people were asking, especially film schools and other DPs who have Super 16 lenses, that they wanted a camera that could do that. And the FX9 kind of answered that call in that sense, that it has a Super 16 mode.
Absolutely. I did a show where I loved the look of the Kowa Promenade spherical lenses, and what's great is that even which is a Super 35 format lens, but on the Venice 2, it still gave me 4K within the Super 35 of that, and that was a great option. And the flip of it is, maybe you own a set of G Masters. Well, can you use your Sony lenses on these cameras, or vice versa? So I think a lot of the times you're looking at a lens sometimes, and because I think people develop strong preferences for lens systems, and then you're almost working backwards and thinking about which cameras play well with those lenses. Director, producer, network preferences. Sometimes you just hear from above, we love this camera. We've always filmed with this camera and it's always looked great. So we'd appreciate it to not experiment with a new camera because we know we're happy with this. Or vice versa, you'll hear, we filmed with this camera before and it's an awful experience and we never want to see it again. So please pick any camera but that. And it's something you have to take into consideration. Is it AC friendly? Does it have all the ports and connections necessary? Or are you going to need to build the camera out to make it usable? Is there a panel on the side of the camera that is helpful for a camera assistant? And is it quick to build? That's something really important too, especially if you're doing unscripted work. If the camera's 45 minutes to build up to like a fully functional package, and now you're thinking, do I put the camera in a camera coffin or do I just leave it built the whole time? That's something to take into consideration. The next one is, you can't underestimate how important it is. Reliability. Is the camera going to let you down? Particularly if you're not filming in a production center, or if you're filming on the weekends, or if you're filming out of town. But if the camera's not working, it's not going to be a very good day for people.
Yeah.
And if you're using a camera body where it's prone to overheating or there's issues, now there's the extra cost maybe of having to bring a lot of backup bodies with you. And so reliability is always something you think about. And it's sort of self-evident, but last but definitely not least is the look. Does this camera help you tell the story you want to tell? Does it help the director tell the story she or he wants to tell? Does it create a compelling image, right? Does it help you translate the image in your head out onto the screen? Write in the comments if I'm talking too fast. I'm a New Yorker. No one's perfect. I'm a fast talker. I can slow it down if that helps. So I thought I'd, at least, from my very, very personal, unofficial perspective, at least break down my thoughts on I think, 3 of the key cameras in the Sony line. I've used them all a bunch. The Venice 2 is, of course, the flagship camera. It's a studio quality camera that I think is competitive with any other camera. And what the Venice 2 does that the other cameras in the Sony line don't do is that it allows you to film in OCN, ST, and XT. And I did a show where part of the look of the show is that you were needing to extract almost a 250% zoom out of full resolution on the Venice. And, when I looked at the image at 100% zoom, the LT looked fantastic. But when I really have to zoom in there, 200+%, I really could see the difference between ST and LT. And so the ability to have ST or XT for big budget projects or projects with a lot of VFX or projects where you have to do a lot of zooming or just projects where quality is paramount, cost no object, then the Venice is, Venice is, of course, then you have to take into consideration.
And you did a great test with that we are going to add to a link that will be available to you where you can watch it back. It's only going to be available for a couple days to be able to watch and not for download necessarily, but showing it online doesn't, especially when you're talking about like a quality test, it's not great, but we'll make it available so that way you guys can all watch it back and have a better understanding.
And one thing about OCN is that, not only is it a great looking format, it's incredibly data efficient. And I think that's something about OCN that maybe, in my opinion, isn't sort of proselytized enough or communicated enough. OCN ST, which is an incredibly high quality format, and in my opinion, superior to ProRes 4x4 in terms of image quality, is a smaller file size. And so a lot of times you'll mention OCN ST and people think it's this enormous file size, but it actually is, if you look at the numbers, smaller than ProRes 4444.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, OCN LT, which is, I think, the native format of the Burano, if you will, that's, I think, definitely superior to XAVC 480 and just about the same size. Yeah. And so OCN is a really great camera format, and I guess I'm here to sing its praises today. And
to just kind of put it, because I don't think that we said this specifically, but XOCN is 16-bit. 16-bit as raw as you're going to get ones and zeros. And then ProRes 4444 quad 4 is 12-bit, and XAVC is 10-bit. So also to kind of put numbers to the thought process with a cinematographer, right, is like making that decision based off of how much color rendition you'll have, especially if you're going to post.
I couldn't have said it better myself, of course. And I think when you're shooting scenes like scenes with smoke, or scenes that play down in the shadows with a lot of fine detail, you, in my opinion, start to really see AVC sort of break up a bit.
That's such a great point.
Does it.
Great point.
The Venice 2 has a fantastic viewfinder, and the camera systems, of course, all love that there's controls on the on both sides of the controls on the
AC side, yeah.
And that's
and less controls on the operator side, so that our operator friends don't accidentally change things. We love that.
So I've got clips to show. Oh wait, I've got more slides. Next slide.
Oh yeah. Oh, more, yeah.
Everybody's favorite feature. It's got an ND3 behind the lens. I can't tell you just personally how many minutes over the course of a day and probably hour over the course of a week that ND3 saves you. It's just incredibly helpful. It's got a very high refresh rate. So if you're filming tennis or sports, or a fight scene with a lot of kind of panning, that refresh rate really helps. And it's got anamorphic capability in 4x3. So when you sort of max the camera out, if you will, for a full frame anamorphic, you're looking at almost a 36x24 sensor size, which is pretty nice. And as I mentioned before, it also is very, very viable in Super 35 mode. If you want to use your Cooke S4s, or if you want to use your Super Baltars, you can zoom the camera into Super 35. And I think particularly if you bump the bit rate up to ST, it really looks fantastic.
And going back a little bit to the super high refresh rate, obviously the fast sensor of the cinema line, it's also highly recommended for virtual production. I think it performs the best in that scenario compared to all of the other cameras. So.
So I've got clips. I can show a little bit of yeah, let's take a look at this. So here's a show I shot, and you can see we kind of moved between Venice and FX3 and zoomed in on the Venice pretty seamlessly.
We didn't really know what that meant. It either meant we were going somewhere else, or it meant they were sending us back. You know, Marty, ever the optimist, it could be good news, we don't know. And they said political asylum, it's denied. Like, you have to leave now, today.
Great. And then the overheads for that. So just, this was kind of the breakdown.
Yeah.
I love that you added the camera in the corners for us. So you had the Venice, and then you had the FX3 with a diopter.
And that was an autofocus, by the way.
Through a diopter.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's great. The autofocus, the way the Sony autofocus works, it doesn't get thrown off by a diopter, because it's not, I don't know too much about the technology of it, but I know filters don't throw it off.
Yeah.
But yeah, that camera is just rigged, just on C-stand on, right there in autofocus. And as long as we kept an eye on the screen and made sure that, you know,
It was,
didn't, you know, no one ducked out of the frame, and it always held focus.
Yeah.
Even wide open with a diopter.
Sony's autofocus, and I think the reason why it does so well is because it's twofold. It's both contrast based and like a sonar based. So it's using not just the distance between itself and the subject, but also contrast. So if one starts to not do so well, the other side of it will start to, which is probably why it does well through a diopter.
Some of the autofocuses, I think if you throw a lot of filtration on, sometimes it struggles more.
Yeah. And then you had the Venice with the second shot 2 times zoomed in, which was really cool and looked great. And then the FX9, it's a profile. And here's our overheads and proof of autofocus.
Yeah.
And then something else I thought was really interesting too, was because you were shooting the Venice through an Interatron, which also can be maybe introduce some image quality issues. So even though you punched in, you said, which XOCN did you use for that one again? ST standard.
Because they were long interviews, and so
Yeah. XT would have been
XT would have been a lot of would have been buying a lot of hard drives.
Yeah. And cards.
But yeah, the other thing to be mindful of is not only was did the format need to withstand the zoom, but also just the image quality, just the sharpness itself.
Yeah.
And so we were using you know, really sharp prime lenses, and I think we stopped them down to around 4 for the sharpness, but because of the Venice's sensor size, we're still able to keep a nice shallow depth.
Yeah. Let's see, do we have any questions about those? You're doing really great because you're explaining very well because there are no questions.
Let's do you want to show that clip from the commercial?
Yes, that's a great idea.
It goes by quick, but I did a commercial where I mostly was a Venice 2 with anamorphic, but it's great having that FX3 there to just sneak in for shots. There are 2 shots, one's in a refrigerator and one's just a macro shot of an eye, where I felt like autofocus would just be better.
Yeah.
And so I snuck in 2 FX3 shots, and I labeled them here, but I think the audience hopefully didn't notice.
Yeah.
It's without sound.
Oh, great. So you can talk through it.
So that's the Venice 2 anamorphic. And
Wow.
right there, that reflection on the eyeball that's
so great.
Well, so
Wow.
that was an FX3 at 12,800 ISO with a diopter on a 200 mil G Master zoom with a doubler on it.
Oh my gosh.
There's some Steadicam, and look for the next FX3 shot. He's going to open up the refrigerator.
Cool.
There it is. And so you could either cut a hole in the back of the fridge, or you can have an FX3 that you can just put in the fridge, and that's a lot easier. And your friends in the art department will be happy that you didn't destroy their refrigerator.
This is true.
So that's an example of just the Sony system and how well the FX3 can cut in with the Venice.
And we'll have that will be one of the clips included in the link that we send. Okay, so how about we talk a little bit about Burano?
Sure.
So you just recently did something with Burano, right? So let's take off from you're able to film at a variety of sensor sizes.
Yes.
Great.
Just like the Venice, you can film on a variety of sensor sizes. And this is something that Burano does that I think no other camera does, which is you can stabilize in a PL mount lens. And so on the test video, we had a Cabrio 19-90 lens, handheld, and we turned on stabilization for it, and it worked great. Something else that I think is very unique to the Burano, which is that the G Master lenses, which I think are phenomenal full frame lenses, they're very lightweight, they're very sharp, they're fantastic wide open. You could now use them in really more of a high-end context. The G Masters are great, but since they don't really work,
Pulling focus it's not intuitive as to a cinema style lens.
that's right.
Yeah.
If you have a mechanical focus, a lot of times they wouldn't play very well with mounting them on a Venice.
Yeah.
But what you can do is you can put them on a Burano, and since the Burano has such good autofocus, you can be autofocusing along and use them professionally. And so there's some shots that I did on a Dana Dolly and some macro shots where just putting G Master lenses on the Burano and autofocus was absolutely the best just creative decision. And so it opens, if you have a set of G Masters or if you like those lenses, it opens them up to you in a more professional context. It's smaller and lighter than a Venice, and it's got a really excellent anamorphic D-squeeze feature. Next page. And it's a welcome addition to the Sony ecosystem. So it kind of fits in between the FX9 and the Venice. And similar to the Venice, but even more so, it's lens agnostic in that you can use anything from a still photo lens, a vintage, still photo lens you find on, in a flea market. You could put on the Burano, you could put on your G Masters, or you could also put on, your top of the line Hawk anamorphics, and they all sort of play with the camera equally well. And that's to have that is incredibly freeing, because then you sort of know you've got one camera that's going to work with everything.
Yeah.
So maybe we can
You want to show some clips?
Yeah, let's look at clip one.
Clip one.
So this is sort of Burano in verite mode, or documentary mode. It's in Super 35 with a 19-90, and then I've got some FX3 with a 24 G Master in there. That's your FX3.
The grade looks really great.
And now we're into Burano handheld. Cabrio. And you see it's holding the highlights and the shadows, in my opinion, really, really well here, even in Super 35 mode.
That's something interesting that you brought up. I think that some people do ask, like, is there a dynamic range difference between different imager modes? And there isn't. It's the same across all imager modes.
It's the noise level will change at high gain, but the dynamic range won't.
Correct.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
You may have a more technical answer than that.
No, that is correct. Yeah.
That's the FX3 shot, and you can sort of feel in the sky that it was the FX3. And then we're back to the Burano here. And again, really handling the shadow and the highlight, I think, really nicely.
Oh no, it's a broken car.
Broken car. Spoiler alert, they fix it at the end. Okay, let's look at the next clip.
Great. So we'll look at number 2. I'll turn the audio down.
So we thought we'd kind of level the camera up here. Oh, pardon me, scene 3, I apologize.
Scene 3.
We thought we'd level the camera up here. So now it's the Burano in full frame mode with full frame supreme prime radiance at 40 frames per second, but at 3200 ISO. So wide open on fast lenses at 3200 ISO. The one light source really driving the scene is that desk lamp, and that had a tube. It had a pavo tube in there, and that was literally dimmed down to 1%.
Wow.
And now still too bright, and we have to tape net it for the
Wow.
light to dip it down even more.
Wow.
The light above isn't really generating much light. It's just the one bounce from the desk lamp, and then
Wow.
there's a light with some cyan on it that's just giving kind of room tone. And then maybe we can
Pretty.
take a quick look at scene 4.
Yeah.
And so I guess our sort of ultimate level was going to anamorphic. And so here's the Burano with Atlas Orion anamorphics on it at 800 ISO.
On steady. Nice. Ooh, flares. Love flares. Sparks.
And again, I think this is a shot. These are shots where with ABC, you'd be struggling a little bit just with all the smoke.
That's such a great, that's a really good point. It's really interesting.
And I tried to design something hopefully that was more of a real world test. I think sometimes when people do camera lens tests, it's a person with a chart in front of a few string lights in a room, and that's helpful, but almost every camera these days is going to look great like that.
Yeah.
I really wanted to do a test that would sort of really push the camera and play in the shadows as much as possible, and have just a lot of dynamic range, and see just sort of what the camera can kind of handle.
That was nice. You still held detail in the headlight.
Yeah, there's even more in there. I almost let it, you know, go brighter than it needed to. And the lighting in this is actually pretty simple. We had one 2400 that was kind of rigged above the, that's providing that kind of 3/4 backlight above on one of the rafters. And then we had haze, and then we had some fill into a 12x12 bounce. And that was mostly it. We just kind of let the camera work its magic. There it goes. You can pause it from here.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Any questions?
So far, no questions.
Okay.
So then the next thing, it's 10:40 and we'll just keep going since we've been doing questions as we go, which is great. So next we're on our FX3. And you've got it in its like most simplest form to its most like complex form.
Yeah. So it was great about the FX3 is that, you know, you can, as you can see, you can put 180 mil anamorphic on it, or you can also have it super super lightweight and minimalistic and austere, and just have it on a one-handed gimbal. And it works really well both ways. It's just a great camera to have around. It's a story I always tell, but I always go on a tech scout with an FX3 just on hand, and inevitably the best sunset of the whole shoot happens during the tech scout, and you're there and you can roll on it. And more often than not, it ends up in the movie, or it ends up in the show. And it's just a great camera to have. If you need additional angle, you can rig it anywhere. I'll often say, you know, the ugliest shot is the one that you don't have time to get. And sometimes if a director suggests, hey, it would be great if we could just put the, you know, example, if we just had a shot where it's like the camera's in the refrigerator, it's like a POV of the fridge. Once you start saying, well, okay, it's going to be a bit of a rig, we should probably like take out the back of the fridge, or once you start talking about that, you'll look over and you'll see the assistant director, and they'll just cut you off, and the shot never happens.
Yeah.
But having an FX3 on set, even if it's a show that's 99% relying on other cameras, if you have one on set, you just have a small camera you can use to pick up those shots that would otherwise just get kind of put in the dustbin otherwise.
Yeah, that's a great point. Do you find yourself, because I guess a good question is, how do you find yourself renting FX3s with your Venice cameras or Buranos, or how do you?
Depends.
Yeah.
I own one. It's like, it's a beloved possession. I own one. I take it with me, like I said, everywhere.
Mhm.
But for example, on the film you just showed,
Mhm.
we needed 3 or 4 of them,
Mhm.
so we rented those.
Great.
So I think it depends.
So often it's usually you'll have one at least and then kind of go from there, but yeah.
I'll have one, but I've been on shoots where we need 7 or 8 of them, and
Yeah. And so
I
you,
don't have 8.
yeah.
Maybe someday. But it's a really handy thing to have,
Mhm.
and I would say it's for a rental house perspective, it's a very valuable.
Mhm.
I think it's a very valuable camera to have in the inventory, just because a lot of times people think about it last minute.
Yeah.
Say, oh, it'd be great to have an FX3 for that shot, or great to have an FX3 for the gimbal. And it just complements things so well.
Yeah. It's a good point. Here we go with
There you go. That's me. I've got the Burano. Robin's got the FX3.
so your thoughts on the FX3, 12,800 ISO is probably the biggest conversation we have.
Yeah, it does 12,800 ISO. That's why I used it for that eyeball shot. We needed to have enough sensitivity so that we could take an actual vintage television next to someone's eye and be bright enough to see the image off of it. Once we had all the diopters and we're zoomed in, and also enough stop to be able to hold focus reasonably on it. And so even in a shot where you don't think of it as a traditional low light shot, most of the time when people think low light they think about low light as, oh, I'm filming in the forest, or I'm filming in the middle of the night. But sometimes low light just means you're shooting a lot of slow motion, or you need a very deep stop, or it's a kind of specialty shot. And having the 12,000 for those moments is also really helpful. But 12,800 is you can film almost anywhere. If someone says 12,800 isn't a high enough ISO, I'd be surprised. That's
Yeah.
very, very light sensitive.
Yeah.
And it can be built out onto a tripod rig, or it can go on your shoulder.
Yeah.
Fit easily in a car gimbal, or the way I like to use it in those interviews, I would just mount it on the edge of a C-stand arm, put on autofocus, super simple,
Yeah.
no need for a Preston or anything like that, and it's a great additional camera to have.
One thing I don't know if you've run into this, but because I shoot with the Burano and the Venice and the FX6 that all have internal ND, guaranteed if I'm renting or using an FX3, I always forget to ask for 0.3 NDs or put NDs on the rental order. So that's something that I know I have a lot of people say, oh, I forgot to put NDs on the order, simply because they're so used to using other cameras that have it.
Yeah.
So I would say that's maybe one fun thing to just put on your radar if somebody's renting that from you is add ND.
Yeah. It's really, especially because the camera's so light sensitive, sometimes you're having to stack up filters, and I've even found that, because a lot of times I'll use it as a very small camera with a D-Master lens. I just invested in like sets of
Screw-in
NDs and just the necessary
Yeah.
step up filters to cover my whole set. And a lot of times that's simpler than having to do a map box, and it keeps the camera really small.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And actually, a lot of times the screw-in ND has there's almost a quality advantage because you've got a tighter seal around it.
Yeah. Okay, and then we have your second
My
thought.
thoughts on the FX3 Part 2, which is, as you saw, I gave you 2 examples of it cutting with the Burano and cutting really well with the Venice 2 with like top of the line anamorphic lens. I saw the creator on a really, really big screen and I was blown away.
Yeah.
incredible work by the cinematographer on that film, and now shot on the FX3. You can't argue with that.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, it's a great camera to bring anywhere to shoot bonus B-roll. And as you saw in the picture, if you do want to put that Cook 180 mil 2x anamorphic on there, you absolutely can. I did a shoot where I was putting on all sorts of vintage lenses, and it can be adapted to accommodate almost any lens.
Yeah. I really like that how you talk about you like taking on scouts with you and things like that, because I forget about that also, that it's a great time to have it.
Yeah, you'll see something
Yeah.
like, you'll see like a cat will be sitting on top of
Yeah.
a pile of leaves, and you're like, no, that'd be amazing. And if you have the FX3 there, you can
You've got
get a
it.
shot of that, and
Yeah.
you send it to the editor someday, and you'd be surprised how often it finds its
They
way.
cut it. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we also have, oh yeah, these were the overheads that we looked at, but there was also our, the Black in Vegas.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the, some of the awards that it has won?
Sure. I'm really proud of this show. It's part of a whole series that's on Hulu called Sullivanation, and this special is called Black in Vegas, and it was just nominated for several Emmys.
Congratulations.
Hopefully, wish us luck when they give out the award. It was great to be honored that way, and then the National Association of Black Journalists just gave the show an award of excellence a week or two ago as well. So it's a great honor to just be associated with the show, and it's great to see it continue to be recognized.
And you shot this one with the FX9, is that right?
It was I've got a clip for you.
Great.
It was a mix of FX9 and FX3, and even and one thing that's interesting about the show is that if you pause it for a sec, it was FX9, FX3, and FX6, and this show, part of the deliverables was it had to be shot with the look burnt in, no S-log. So everything you see is pretty much the look in camera, maybe some small adjustments later on. And so we took a good advantage of the Cinematone light for this. I was one of the DPs. I shot a bunch of it, and then some other cinematographers, including my good friend Marshall Rose, filmed some other pieces on the East Coast.
Yeah.
And we'll take a look at it. But we all use Cinematone, and
Cool.
you don't need to rely on a heavy color grade necessarily.
Yeah.
Look.
We'll just do a note. We can kind of talk through it. I think it does
It
pay.
goes by fast.
We've got so many people that talk about S-Cinetone. What made you want to bake in S-Cinetone instead of alternatively would have been baking in some other LUT in Cine EI mode? Was there any decision behind that?
If you want to pause next, you can pause that interview. That actually had come from our director team, and she had done a lot of experiments, and it was something that I think that I think quite brilliantly had decided like this was part of the look of it.
Yeah.
And we played a little bit with the settings inside the camera, but that was something the director had really figured out beforehand.
Oh, interesting.
You're all lucky for it.
Wow.
This is all FX3 here. Yeah, that's FX3 in slow motion.
Wow.
FX9. FX9. FX9, FX9. So
Awesome.
we pretty much use the
12,800. There you go, on the strip.
Lunel in Vegas, 12,800 ISO. Just me holding a little gimbal and pure available light there.
Yeah.
And now then it's FX9 with a 135 GMAP there, wide open. And then the height was a 7200 D master.
Nice. Just for the sake of time, I'm gonna go ahead and pause us out of here, because we're getting close to the end. I've been monitoring. We haven't gotten any questions. We got some like good points and things like that. So everything that you're saying, I think, is really resonating with everybody. One of the things that I would like to just quickly go over, because sometimes I think this is also really helpful. Some of these, I found these tips and tricks can be some of the make or break in a camera decision when it comes to the Sony cinema line specifically. One of them, the direct menus, is something I'd like to bring up, as opposed to having to go into the deep menus, because I think a lot of people liked the easy access side of menus when you talk about Venice. And so there is easy access to menus when you are working with the FX6, the Burano, things like that. Something else that I'd like to bring up is also shooting in XAVC. When you shoot in Cine EI mode and you're shooting XAVC, the EI exposure index changes didn't always translate in XAVC, and that was just kind of a third-party platform thing, but you would always see it in Sony software. But now DaVinci Resolve reads those exposure index changes, and I feel that has been, it's a newer update with DaVinci Resolve that this is working with them. So that's something else that we like to bring up. Adobe Premiere now has enhanced performance for XAVC playback and better workflow options. It's something that Sony's been working with a lot more third parties like Adobe and Resolve to be able to help cameras kind of adapt into these things. One of the other things is, I think some people, and I know because we want to specifically talk about the cinema line, some people, have you ever come across where maybe a director or someone says, oh, what about the A7S III as opposed to the FX3? Have you ever run into that? Sometimes. Okay. Because I think the A7S III is an incredible camera that so many people have used, but now with the FX3, because it's more geared towards cinema, we still get those questions. But one of the big ones is with the FX3 that you can time code sync, you can ingest LUTs, things like that, and that's a great kind of tip and trick that if you're asking, oh, I would like to rent, 2 FX3s and 5 A7S IIIs, that FX3 just lends itself better to kind of like cinema shooting in the cinema world. Cache record and interval record. Do you do many time lapses ever, or?
I just did one a week or two ago.
What did you use?
FX3.
Hey, look at that. I'm so glad that that's the answer, because if it wasn't, that'd be upsetting. But interval record is great. The FX3 has it, FX6 has it, Burano has it, FX9 has it. But interval record is great for the time lapse function. And then so cache record is such a great function because if you're shooting like high frame rate, one of my buddies was shooting, I always say this one, but he was shooting whales and he wanted to get a whale breaching in 120 frames, but it's nearly impossible to not just be rolling constantly on 120 frames and burning through media, and not to mention you're like on a boat in Antarctica. And so cache record is essentially the camera has internal memory, and when you go into cache record mode, it's constantly recording the image internally and eating its own tail. So it's kind of eating through its own internal media. When you push, depending on your imager mode and things like that, if you start to see the water moving, you're like, oh, a whale is coming. If you push the button, it's going to also include, up to 30 seconds before the button push in the 120 or the 60 into the high frame rate. And then you can let it roll through. And then when you end it, that clip will include the entirety of the button push, as well as a certain different various amounts of times before that. So cache record can also be really great. I think it's something that not a lot of people know about.
I didn't know about.
Yeah.
This is why it's amazing that we have Katie here.
Yeah.
I know about that. I'm gonna
I think
that next.
it was really like a function of sports is really where this kind of came to be. And then we had a lot of people that are doing documentary or unscripted and want to shoot 120 frames, but don't want to roll forever. So cache record is really, really great. And FX3 does it. All the cameras do it. So even Venice. And then clear image zoom is another one. When all else fails, clear image zoom is essentially, it's not just doing, there's the optical zoom and then there's a digital zoom that is available in some of these cameras. And it's just doing kind of not a 2 times in, but it gets you just a little bit closer. Maybe the difference between like a close-up and like an extreme close-up is the best way to explain it. And it's doing it by not just, it's taking a high resolution, going in closer, and it's doing some AI rebuilding of the image to be able to get you that. And it's just like another small tool in the tool chest that you can have available to you. So those are my tips and tricks that I will leave you with.
You want to talk about the Sony ecosystem? Should I go through that quick?
Yeah, we can. We've got, how are we doing on time?
I could do it in a minute.
You can do it in a minute? Okay, let's do it.
So I talked about the cameras sort of individually, and I think I touched on this maybe a little bit. But here's, I guess, what I would say is, in many ways, the cameras are sort of a multiplier effect. Right? You get this sort of multiplication effect when you have the whole Sony ecosystem working for you as a DP. Just in my opinion, because each of the cameras is great and serves its purpose really, really well and artistically. But when you put them all together as a system, it's, I think, quite extraordinary. And so what you have is, and hopefully maybe we all, the two of us demonstrated a little bit, you have cameras that can fit a variety of sizes, right, in a variety of situations. You're going to be hard pressed to find one camera that's going to do absolutely everything you could possibly imagine.
Yeah. Such a great point.
Between, the Venice 2 and the FX3, right, you probably have a camera that can accomplish what you need. And it's also really helpful to add and subtract camera bodies really easily. Yeah. This is part of pre-production. You look at your schedule and the director says, well, this is a really premium day. This is a signature day where we need to have 5 cameras, 6 cameras, a lot of cameras. Can you add other cameras easily? Will they cut in with the other, cameras you're using? Are they available?
Yeah.
And, sometimes you don't need 5 Venices, right? Sometimes 3 Venices and 2 Buranos will work, or sometimes 3 Venices, 1 Burano, and 2 FX3s will work. You can shrink and expand your production, I think, very easily when you have this range of cameras that are all sort of at different points in the line. Yeah. You can use different lenses, as I mentioned. And again, you've got in the system, you have a camera that can do 12,800 ISO. You have a system that can stabilize lenses. You have a camera that can do autofocus. You have a camera that can do XOCN. And so within the range, you have a lot of sort of niche abilities within the range that you can reach for. Even again, if you have one shot of an eyeball and you need 12,800 for it, you've got that one camera that can do it. And I think this is, again, it's an intangible. This is something that doesn't necessarily show up on a video lens test, but the reliability of the cameras and the availability of the cameras worldwide. If you're filming out of the country, the availability of the line, and the availability of how the camera supported where you go is, I think, make or break for a lot of people. Yeah.
That's I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I think sometimes that it comes into play, or people think about it almost when it's too late. Like, oh, I forgot that about this camera. I forgot that. Whereas with, like you said, with the cinema line, they're reliable. There's a lot of support kind of online across the world. Before we head out, I just wanted to add, I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you so much, Michael. This was such a great experience. We're so happy and lucky that we were able to get you today. I cannot say that enough.
Come on.
I'll come into yours. Okay.
Come on back in there.
Thank you so much. Michael Pessah, everyone.
Katie.
And thank you everyone for coming today. Want to thank you, Michael, for everything. It was really informative, and I really think everyone here probably benefited greatly from it.
If this is the Harry Fox that wrote the book, that's a great book.
Excellent. And I also want to mention that the EWI program is accepting rental company applications now. We still have grants available. So if anyone on here would like to apply for a grant, please do. And feel free to reach out to me, Allison Couples, about the EWI program.
Link. So one link is to the clips, and then this link Password, Harbulary. That is to the slides. Thanks, everybody. Take it easy.
Thanks for
Thank
taking the
you.
time.